What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Inconsequential Gaming. So, today I want to apologize again for my long absence. But to explain, I had a busy 4th of July weekend, and on top of that, I had some personal family issues that I had to deal with. In addition, I've been working a lot, so I've been really tired, and I've been wanting to work on these videos, but I would always be too tired to go through with it and then just choose to go to sleep instead. But, yeah, because you're watching this video, that means that I finally mustered up enough strength to go ahead and start recording. But you're going to notice throughout that I kind of nod in and out. I actually fell asleep while recording, so you'll see cuts in the video where I actually fell asleep. But yeah, I powered through it, and I actually got something done on the checklist that I've been meaning to get done for a while. So I hope you enjoy it. And as you can probably tell, this is going to be a post commentary. Now, the thing is I've really been trying to get back to the standard way that I've been making videos, but it just hasn't been possible because, you know, my life situation is a bit complicated. So, my hope is to try to get that settled as soon as I can. But, yeah, it's been going, so hopefully that'll be solved sooner than later. But that's not why you're here. So why are you here? Let's discuss the 1.4 update, Terraria Journey's End. Let's talk about it a little bit. Well, it's probably going to be more me asking questions because I have a lot of questions. And this is just about, it's generally about one thing, but it's going to lead into other questions that I do have. But the biggest question I have is about the newest boss reveal with Terraria, Journey's End, with a boss called the Blood Nautilis. So, yeah, I have a series of questions, and I guess maybe I'll do some theory crafting in the meantime. But so this is a big question that I have. So, does the Blood Nautilus drop any type of trophy? That's one thing that I'm curious about, because I know there's been playthroughs where players would do challenges of collecting all of the boss trophies, and around the Moonlord update, I think that was 1.3. I believe everyone assumed that would be like the final update, sort of. I mean, I guess not really, but as far as like bosses being added and stuff, like that's what I thought. And so a lot of their trophy rooms are specifically built to hold a certain amount of boss trophies. So, I mean, I guess adding one more, or maybe two more. I don't know. I'm not sure how many more bosses are in there. But my question is, does the Blood Nautilus drop a trophy? Where I'm guessing probably. And does it drop any type of material for craftable items? Is it for something that we already have in game or for something new? That's something I'm curious about. Is it for a weapon or is it for armor? Is it for both? Huh. Because that would be Blood Moon tier armor for maybe hard mode? I don't know. It's just something that's interesting to think about. And yeah, does it craft a spell? I'm not sure about bosses just straight up dropping spells, but I do know they drop weapons. because I do know that there's certain enemies in the underworld that drop spells, but I'm not too familiar with enemies just dropping spells. But I did have that happen in the underworld, and then it also happened during an eclipse, where I think one of the monsters dropped some sort of lightning spell. I can never remember the name of it. It's a really good spell. But yeah, that's something I'm curious about. Yes, are the achievements going to be updated? Because so far I'm only missing one, and it was a fishing quest achievement. Are they going to be reworked? Can they be reworked? Like if you, so maybe it might be a thing where it automatically checks it off as you defeating the boss if you already have all the achievements except for one, or maybe even all of them. But maybe starting a new playthrough, you might get a new achievement. I'm not sure about that. Can that be reworked? Yeah. And with the new biomes to explore, like, will there be an achievement for finding the oasis? I mean, I know it's not that difficult to do, maybe, because it seems like a surface level mini biome, but I mean, there's one for the for granite and marble, I think. I don't know. Just interesting to think about. Another thing that has me super curious is the different versions of the boss depending on the progress that you've made in the game, right? Because, for example, with all of the bosses we have now, like Eye of Cthulhu, Brain of Cthulhu, the Eater of Worlds, things like that, for normal uh, expert, for normal and expert mode, there's there's two different versions of that boss. And now, because of master mode, there's going to be three. So I'm kind of curious. As far as the Blood Nautilus is concerned, we're going to have three different versions of that boss, and they're all going to be new. Whereas with the other bosses, for example, like the Moon Lord, maybe even Duke Fisheron, I wouldn't really count the solar events because I believe nothing really changes, but I could be wrong. But wow, even normal enemies have different abilities and attacks in expert mode. So I'm wondering with master mode, wow, what's the Blood Nautilus going to be like? That's just a new boss for all different versions. For normal, expert mode, and master mode. So I'm kind of curious about its pattern. From what I saw, it looks like an interesting boss that does something a little unique that the other bosses don't do, which is strafe around the player, which is interesting to see because normally it would be the player strafing around a boss, and I guess kiting or even running circles around it. Seems like the boss does that to the player. So I'm kind of curious about how intense that gets on the different difficulty levels. Yes, and what new attacks or patterns that the Blood Nautilus might have. Oh, look, there's me nodding off right there. I was half asleep building this this brick walkway. But yeah, I got it done. Man, I was really suffering here, but as you can see, I made it through, so I hope you enjoy. But yeah, aside from that, I'm really curious about this boss because everything's gonna be new. Aside from any other new bosses we get, aside from the Blood Nautilus, that's gonna be another interesting thing is that we're gonna get 3 different versions of a new boss, depending on the difficulty that you're playing on. So I thought that was pretty cool. Another thing that I was curious about is I was wondering if the Blood Nautilus is tied to any type of angler quest, right? The NPC who gives you the fishing quests. Now, I know it might seem a little out of place to ask. Well, I mean, maybe not so much. But the reason that I ask is because normally, no matter, I'd say, what difficulty you're on, if you don't grab the angler, he'll be sleeping in the ocean or on the beach. Either one. And I think it would be strange to be able to summon the Blood Nautilus. Oh, no, I don't know though, but maybe during the blood moon he's not there. It's just odd because I remember him being there at weird times of the day, so maybe it has to be day for the angler to actually be either floating in the ocean or on the beach somewhere asleep. But I was wondering, could the two exist? And I'm thinking if, well, what I mean is, if you're fighting the Blood Nautilus, can he accidentally kill the angler? Well, I mean, I know the angler can't necessarily die, but I don't know. Is the angler invincible? I've never seen the angler get attacked before. Now I have a whole bunch of other questions because I've never seen the angler directly get attacked. I've just kind of saw the text that said he either vanished or ran away. But I don't know. I think this might be a question that's not worth asking, but it's mostly because I've never seen it. Is I'm wondering, can the angler be destroyed or forced to run away by the Blood Nautilus if it gets summoned while he's still there? And then on top of that, maybe he can't even be summoned at night. Or not even summoned at night, but I mean, maybe the angler can't be in the ocean biome at night, so maybe the two will never cross paths. But it is interesting because I'm curious if the angler gives you the quest to fight the Blood Nautilus. Or another thing that has me curious, are boss quests going to be a thing where NPCs sort of give you a quest to defeat or fight a certain boss? Is that going to be part of the update? The reason that I ask that is because of the bestiary. Now, I'm thinking about speaking on that extensively, but I would see it kind of a waste for the bestiary to just kind of be a novelty feature, and it kind of being tied to quests would be a little bit more interesting. Because even though it's called a bestiary, maybe that's just a page of the that new feature. Perhaps it has other things, like maybe a checklist of things to do. So that way it probably won't be intrusive. Sort of like a journal for anyone who's played Elder Scrolls games, or something like Morrowind. There's usually a journal where you'll have a bunch of quests, and they don't pop up on the screen, so they're not intrusive. But if you ever wanted to check what it is that you should be doing next, there will be a checklist of quests that once you complete them, they'll kind of gray out, or will have a check next to it to let you know that it's been completed, and then you can move on to the next one. So I'm wondering if the bestiary is just going to be a certain page and some sort of journal that you have, and perhaps there'll be little quests that maybe the NPCs don't even have to give you. It could even be maybe just suggested things to do in the game. just on a list, so then that way you don't have to always talk to NPCs. Or maybe they might be tied together. I have a bunch of questions. It's funny, I wasn't really expecting to ask these questions and then be curious about a whole other set of things that are possible. But yeah, I'm really curious about this bestiary. You know, is it just going to be a novelty thing? And don't get me wrong, even if it is novelty, it'll still be useful. I always kind of wanted to know what enemies drop. If you're looking for something specific, you can know which, I guess, planet surface level to be on, or what mode you should be on, whether it's hard mode or normal. You know, things like that. I mean, for the most part, it shouldn't be too hard for a person who's a veteran player, but if you're a new player, this game can be really confusing sometimes. So, I don't know. I think it just being a bestiary isn't necessarily a wasted opportunity, but I'm curious if it'll be more quest based, or it could even be where it has its own individual lore attached to a quest, where it's not given by an NPC. It's just something that's written about, like, for example, the Legend of Duke Fishron. And I spoke about this in my last video, where I don't recall any NPCs giving any type of quest or information on Duke Fishron. So if this bestiary or / notebook feature does something like that would be really cool. And then especially if it's tied to the NPCs, that'll be much cooler, where you're having more interactive reasons to, I guess, instead of it being more interactive, but just have more reasons to actually talk to the NPCs, other than just buying things from them. You know, which isn't bad, but it would just make the game a little bit more interesting. And then I guess, depending on the NPC you talk to, and I just thought about that, we're getting, I think, several new NPCs, so yes, I'm just wondering, it's just seeming like it might be pointing towards the direction where we might get more quest-based adventures. I don't know, I just can't really see the Blood Nautilus just being some random thing where a player's just expected to know to fish during a blood moon. Or it could even be a thing where during a blood moon you have to fish, or it might be the only way to get a certain fish item for the angler, and he might warn you about the Blood Nautilus. I don't know. It's just so many possibilities. It just has me curious about how that's going to work. But I do want to speak more about this bestiary. I'm not quite done with that just yet. Okay, so discussing a little bit more about my theories on this bestiary. So what I'm wondering, right, is will it be quest-based as far as unlocking new information about monsters is concerned, right? So, for example, I know that it's probably a great possibility that killing monsters will give you the information on them, but I'm wondering if before you even are introduced to the monster, or you even see it, maybe they give hints in the bestiary of where it is that you can find it, and then that's sort of considered a quest, because it would be interesting if they play around with that. Whereas you know, I mean, I guess there's many ways that newer monsters information can be unlocked, but I'm thinking it would be really cool if there were like little hints, so it was almost like quests, where investigate this cavern or this planetary or world level, uh, to find out more, and then the likelihood of you running into the monster increases or something like that. Other than speaking directly to NPCs, it could kind of be its own little feature. So I'm curious about how that's going to be handled, because that seems really fun. I know I've probably said it before, but I'm the type of person when I play Terraria that sometimes I just like to leave the game sitting and just kind of enjoy the weather effects, the music, things like that. So just having the bestiary open is probably something that I would do whilst my character is just sitting in a chair um, with a candle and the wind blowing outside. Like, that's just the type of things that I like to do in this game. I know it's strange, but everybody enjoys Terraria a little different. So I'm wondering also, are there hints to unlocking the next monster or boss's information? And then, because I know that the bestiary is going to give you information on the items that they drop, I'm just wondering how far are they going to go with it? Like, how much of its own thing is it going to be? How interesting is it going to be? As I said before, like, if it's just novelty, I won't mind, because it will be useful in its own way. Because I'm even thinking about the bestiary, again, just being a page, because I also have this idea that craftable items might also be something that's part of a book or some kind of journal that you have, where the bestiary is just one function, and then maybe a crafting menu of things that you've made already, or things that you can make. Aside from speaking to the guide, I don't know. It seems like there's a lot that can be done with it. So perhaps it might even be something that you have to unlock. Maybe you don't even get it from the very beginning. Who knows? Like, maybe you even have to buy the bestiary or the journal or whatever it is. It could be a possibility of, like, a lot of things. Can't know for sure, but it just has me curious. So yeah, like, I don't know. I think out of all of the things that I've seen, I probably have more questions about the bestiary than anything else. Mostly because, as I said, like, if it's a lot more useful than just telling a player about items and, like, enemy locations, or maybe even their weaknesses and things like that, it could even be a little quest book. So and then that can even be added on later as a quality of life thing. I don't know. I'm just really curious about it, because if it's what I think it is, that'll be cool. But if it's not quite in its novelty, I can see probably making some suggestions in the future about how they could really take advantage of it, and it not be super demanding or anything that requires a whole lot of effort, but more so just a quality of life improvement, where the bestiary is more so a journal, and then that portion is just a page, and then a lot of the other things can be about crafting recipes that maybe you've already made, or maybe be tied to like I said, quests, where instead of NPCs having to tell you everything, the legend of Duke Fishron can be an entry in the journal or something like that, to kind of I guess point newer players in the direction that there are secrets in the game that you can discover if you just read text and things like that. I don't know, like, it's just, I feel like there's an opportunity to do some really cool stuff with that. So I don't know, it just made me ask a bunch of questions. So, because it was never mentioned specifically in the spoiler trailer, or I think any of the spoilers that have been posted by the team working on Terraria, uh, this might come off a little strange, but I wanted to talk about the possibility of a quest checklist. Now, I did touch on it a few times when I was speaking mostly about the bestiary and me being curious about the blood nautilus. But let me be a little bit more specific, and then maybe that might help in case the idea of it might be confusing. So when I speak of a quest checklist, it doesn't necessarily have to mirror something that we've seen already. And then again, it could, because there was not necessarily discussion of a quest checklist, but there was a spoiler of a quest checklist in Terraria Otherworld, and it was the simple formula that you'd see in other games like Elder Scrolls or Morrowind. Now, the reason I bring it up is because I'm wondering if perhaps it might be a way to make the NPCs have less of a job to do, and not necessarily in a bad way, but more so allow the NPCs to kind of focus on being storefronts and perhaps like hint givers, and then when the world is expanding, I would say possibly like beyond what the developers want to reveal to the player immediately, it can be handled with the quest checklist. Giving an example, right? A quest checklist can give hints about monsters, hints about critters, items, or materials. So, for example, there's a lot of mining to be done in Terraria, and perhaps discussion in the quest checklist about, say, something like marble or granite. The player might be tempted to kind of see if they can find that rare material, and then on their mission to finding it, because I guess the quest checklist might tell them that it might be at a certain level. Having things like the depth meter that you get from bats will become much more useful, because when you think about it, the depth meter is only really useful to someone who is seasoned at Terraria and understands this game on a deeper level, because really the depth meter is kind of like other than generally exposing or maybe giving a heads up of the type of enemies that a player might start running into from experience, I'm not sure if the depth meter serves any purpose beyond that, at least not in my experience. But what I mean is, if the guest checklist would say that you could find granite or marble at this depth, it'll make older items like the depth meter much more useful, and then it will kind of give the player something to do, which is like, I don't think I've ever played the game and said, oh, I want to go find marble or granite right away. I mean, I guess you can if you know it exists, but for a new player that might seem interesting, and then they'll be trekking for this this marble or granite, and then run into other adventures on their way there, because there'll be a lot to see. Just little small examples like that. And perhaps when they discover a new biome, maybe have a little exclamation point marker next to the quest checklist to let them know that they discovered something new, in the same way the achievements pop up, and then just let them in on a little biome information, any natural disasters or warnings. For example, the sandstorm in the desert, there could be a whole lore entry on that biome, warning the player that desert storms or windstorms or sandstorms are to be feared, and perhaps they should get inside or build themselves a little base. You know, just little tidbits like that, and maybe about traps and hazards when a player finds themselves inside of the caverns, because usually you won't know about traps or hazards until you actually step on them. I guess not to spoil it for newer players, but I mean maybe just kind of give them light warnings or tips, or maybe if they step on one, it'll come up in their quest checklist or lore guide, so that they look out for it in the future, because maybe they survive it by the skin of their teeth. It would be cool to have it watch out for boulder traps, and these are the places where you can find them. It would be interesting if they had something like that. And then I was also thinking that completing the quest checklist might unlock other things. For example, that's where we'll see more information on or directories about other pages, which I want to discuss in a little bit, such as a builder's and crafting guide, something similar to what the guide does, where if you give him a material, he'll tell you what it can build. Little cool stuff like that. I'm still not sure, but I'm just thinking that would be a great opportunity to really use that function. It's just something that comes to mind. So, for example, a builder and crafting guide, I don't necessarily see a purpose of taking that ability away from the guide, but I mean, perhaps make the guide more useful in other ways, and perhaps have a crafting and building guide where you have access to it at all times. Maybe you don't even have to be on the surface, and you can look into it, put an item into the slot, and it'll tell you all the things that you can make. No different than going on the internet looking at a website. I mean, maybe it's just it'll be a quality of life upgrade. I mean, who knows? I mean, I do like the idea of speaking to the guide, but I mean, let's be honest. If he ever is killed, then that ability for you to look up recipes and stuff is pretty much removed from the game. So, I mean, why not just keep it by just adding a builder's and crafting guide? And then it can give you general info about building and crafting armor. If you as the player actually have the items in your inventory, maybe they'll be highlighted, maybe they'll be washed out or grayed out. Recipes might show up if you discover something new, and you'll have a little marker next to your guide or checklist, or the little book icon that represents your bestiary. I mean, it only makes sense, I think, for all of those things to be connected into categories, and then you can just kind of scroll through it like you do with your other menus. I don't know. I think it would be pretty interesting. And then any recipes that you learn, maybe they'll have a marker next to it, or I don't know. Maybe you can categorize them. Maybe they're separated into things like potions and armor and weapons. The same way the actual building guide is when you click on the hammer icon. I mean, I see a potential for a lot of cool stuff where it's just not a guide about monsters, but maybe just a guide about the game in general. I don't see a reason for them not to do it. And then on top of that, of course, the bestiary being one of the many pages of the quest or checklist guide, and that's just one section. It's its own guide. You have a bestiary guide or a boss guide, a builder and crafting guide, and then of course a quest checklist and lore guide. Or maybe those will be their own separate things, but I think that would be really cool to have, where you get information about a ton of things with the guide, and not just a bestiary by itself. So that was an idea. And I guess the last thing that I'd want to touch on are the new summoning items. Um, of course, how that's going to affect the summoner class. The new ranged class update, where it's being merged with, I think, all the other classes that use bows and guns and things like that. And how it's going to be a different experience going through the game for newer players and older players. And the fact that there's going to be new go-to items, weapons, and armors and stuff like that. I guess kind of just talk about that a little bit. So as far as like the new summoning items, um, as far as I recall, my go-to was defeating the Bee Queen, and I always fought her on the surface because I always seem to have issues fighting her in her actual lair. I just recall like dying brutally the first time she was accidentally summoned when I was playing through with a friend, and I've never tried to kill her in her lair ever since that day. So I think she gets a power boost when she has to come to the surface to come after you. But I don't know if that's accurate or not. But that's just kind of what I think, because I believe Plant Terra gets the same buff, which is another boss that I have trouble with. But if that's the case, I always felt like fighting her with a summon made her 10 times easier. But what was interesting was defeating her was how you would get the summoning armor. So I always felt like I was in this weird place of wanting to get a power up, but I had to go through her to do it. And it would always make me like roll my eyes in the back of my head, like, oh goodness, here we go. I gotta go fight the Bee Queen. Because the biggest thing with her was the little bees that she would summon. They would always like really mess me up, and I would always think to myself, I really wish I had a summon to take care of these. But it might be possible that there's summons that you can get aside from the slime staff early game, which would change a lot of stuff. I think it would just make the game overall easier, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I'm not against making things necessarily easier. I'm more about the experience. But I don't know. Like I've come to appreciate that she's sort of like a mountain that you have to climb. But the thing about Terraria is I always felt like, at least my own personal experience, is that it would always give you stuff when it would have been nice to have it before you fought this or that monster. That's just kind of how I always felt about Terraria. Like for example, Duke Fisheron, I kind of feel like the Typhoon spell, Razor Typhoon, would have been nice to have before you fought him, because it's really difficult to hit him because he's always teleporting. And the only spell that I think is really good against him, in my opinion, before you actually fight him. Well, there's actually two spells. I think Nimbus Cloud. I don't know if that's the name, but I'm just gonna call it Nimbus Cloud. And then the Razor type. Not Razor Typhoon. It's some spell that you get from the underworld. I can't recall exactly what the name of it is, but yes, it's that spell. I feel like that one's okay. I would rather have Razor Typhoon, is my point. But you don't get it until after you defeat him, so it's one of those things. Just like, oh, thanks a lot. Now it makes it easier to kill him again. But what I'm saying is I've come to appreciate the grind, where it's just like you get the thing that makes the boss easier to kill once you've already beaten him, which isn't necessarily a bad design choice. I just think having the summon in normal mode, I guess pre-hard mode, will make things a little easier. But I'm not sure how powerful it's going to be, so it might not make that much of a difference. But I really feel like for me, in a playthrough, it'll definitely be a go-to item. But the summoner class, I guess you can start a little sooner, and you don't have to go through the pain of trying to obtain slime staff, which is, you know, I think one of the most rarest items in the entire game. So the new range class update though, it was kind of a crying shame that you would get like throwing knives and ninja stars and all that, and then they would basically be obsolete. And I believe there were some that you could obtain during hard mode or sooner, depending on like what it is that you did. But then they hardly ever got used. I don't even use ranged weapons outside of PvP and adventure maps. That was another one because I really feel like they're super useful early game. I don't know, like in very specific cases, and I feel like during something like a blood moon, like they're really specific. Is my point. After that, it's better just to, in my opinion, make a frostburn uh, bow setup with ice crystals and fire arrows, or just use jester's arrows if you can with fallen stars. It's better, like I said, it's just better just to go ahead and get the boost, or at most just go ahead and get the meteor armor and the ray gun. So I don't know, like that's just my opinion. That's always been my go-to. Is just getting the meteor armor because it allows you to do so much, and then having that infinite ammo. Like, but I mean, if it's possible where you can do an alternative where you try to kill King Slime to get the ninja set, and then it's actually worth investing into being a range class because even though it would be arguable that perhaps the meteor armor is better. I don't know. You might just have a desire for the minimum challenge of just go ahead and investing in your range class early. Even though Terraria is not necessarily a committal type game when it comes to classes, maybe probably just for your own satisfaction, where the difference is negligible, maybe noticeable but negligible, and you can just stay loyal to your class from the very beginning. That would kind of be interesting because I would love to be a ninja and just throw ninja stars the entire playthrough, like, and just investing in throwing items and cow traps or the goblin spikes. I don't know. That seems like a fun idea. I've never done it before because, again, like the ranged option was kind of like, it was kind of mediocre. So, I mean, it was definitely fun, but if you really didn't want to die, like that, it wasn't one of your best options. And so, yeah, considering that there might be new go-to items or the fact that you could be class loyal from the very beginning, it'll change your experience. I'm guessing for everyone because I was thinking mostly for newer players, but even for veteran players like myself. Um, and there's a lot of things I don't know about this game still, but that would be really cool to have different playthrough styles. And then also having the option of there being multiple go-tos. Because as I said before, my first go-to is to just go ahead and get the meteor armor. But there's been cases where, I mean, maybe I didn't feel like having a meteor on my world to kind of destroy it. So maybe if you don't want to summon a meteor, you don't have to, because the Brain of Cthulhu and Eater of Worlds can be summoned manually. So you don't have to destroy shadow orbs if you don't want to. Like, you could skip a whole bunch of stuff if you really wanted to, and just having the option to do a different type of playthrough because there's different go-tos when it comes to power-ups, that sounds cool. And even with the adjustment to the underworld, where I believe it's much harder to collect, or maybe even impossible to collect magma stone, I believe, to build an imp staff and stuff like that. I think it's impossible to do until you kill the wall of flesh. Maybe either it's harder to do or they just dissolve into lava. I'm not sure. I haven't tried it in a while because my first go-to was to get an imp staff, and I don't recall if like that's been patched or not. But yeah, that was a go-to that I had. I'm not sure if that's changed or not. So I mean, if it has, that would be surprising. But usually I would just go with the meteor armor and ray gun. So yeah, having different options where you don't have to do the same playthrough all the time, I'm with it. That sounds exciting. Now, before I wrap things up, I want to also give out some notable mentions. Uh, as far as power ups are concerned, I mean, that are kind of aside from the meteor armor, in my opinion. Because I feel like the meteor armor is in a class of its own, but there are some notable mentions depending on how it is that you play. And I guess taking boss arenas into consideration too, it can have a rather large impact on how successful you are. So some of those notable mentions are the enchanted sword, and I don't necessarily put that on the same tier as the meteor armor, mostly because I don't think it's a guaranteed drop. I believe that I don't know about the hidden oasis very much. I'm under the impression that the hidden oasis is an optional mini biome, and you maybe don't have to get one in every world. But then again, I play on really old maps where like there's no such thing as a hidden oasis. So I mean, I've done playthroughs for like years, I think, without even knowing about the enchanted sword until much later on. So I mean, perhaps, but I do know also that there's a chance that you can get another sword. I think maybe it's called like the Arceus or something like that. I was never sure on how to pronounce that, but yes, I think it's a chance you could get that sword or the enchanted sword, which I think both are pretty decent power-ups. I think the enchanted sword might be slightly more powerful, but I don't know. And then there was the option of getting the flying carpet from the pyramid in the desert biome, and I also believe that's random. Like there's no guarantee that you'll get one. So I figured I'd throw those out there, and I think I should probably throw in the Star Fury too. I don't know if that's the power up version of it, but it's the I don't know. It's kind of tough to say whether that one's that good or not. I mean, I think it's okay, but if it's not the Star Fury, it's the low level version that you can get from the Sky Worlds or the Cloud Islands. There you go. So that's also something I guess I should throw out there. And then I guess some other notable mentions are the Rally Yo-Yo. If you can get string and I guess build a yo-yo pack or a yo-yo bag really quick, because you have enough money to get a lot of the I think the pieces from the bone salesman that you can find in a cavern sometimes. I'm never sure what his name is. He's like an undead salesman who sells the yo-yo parts. I think you could probably get a really huge power boost, but again, that's kind of chance because there's no guarantee that you'll run into him. The Rally Yo-Yo, you can farm that from geckos, I think, but again, like you have to power it up. So that's like the only thing. I think the string you can probably make yourself, but getting the counterweight and the dual yo-yo upgrades and things like that, I believe that's kind of random. I mean, unless you save up a lot of money and then just spend a whole bunch of time down there until you run into him and then hope he's selling what it is that you want. But other than that, I just figured it was a notable mention. And then there are, I think, a few pieces to the ancient shadow armor that are dropped by the corruption bugs, which I also believe to be chance drops. I don't think there's a guarantee that you will get one, but I mean, I guess if you farm them enough, you can. And I don't remember exactly what pieces the corruption bugs drop, but I'm pretty sure you can't complete the armor, but you can get a decent amount of pieces of it, or maybe just the helmet, or maybe the entire ancient set. I'm not sure anymore. I think that's one of the cool things about the corruption, I believe, that is understated, is that you can probably get a whole set of ancient armor from them, from the corruption bugs, but I don't know. I'm not sure how good the chances are with that, because I've never spent a whole lot of time. You know, I was about to lie and say I'd never spent a whole lot of time farming them before, but that's not true. I have. But even with doing that, I've never seen them drop a full set for me before, even though I've farmed the corruption for hours. And not intentionally, but it was in a world where I was working on an experiment of what would happen if you mix corruption with crimson, and built it on top of a castle, and I would walk back and forth and just randomly just kill chimeras and corruption bugs like almost every day. And I don't think even with all of that I saw like armor pieces regularly, so it might be a super rare drop. But it's worth noting that you can get the armor that way. But again, like it's no guarantee. Like you can't just, you know, run and then say this is what I'm going to get today and then guarantee that it'll be a drop. So, and then I'm also curious about what will be the best new weapons to use against bosses, especially the Blood Nautilus, again, because it's such a new boss. Who knows what to expect? Like it might even have a gimmick where fighting it when you don't have a certain upgrade or certain armor pieces or a certain weapon might be a pain, because it might have different forms, especially in expert mode. So I mean, wow, like that's something to think about, because that'll change some of your go-tos as well if that becomes a boss that you want to kill early, if it's not a hard mode only boss, which it's seeming like, but who knows. There's always surprises to be found in Terraria. And then I was wondering about the new summons, as well as the possibility of more sentry summons, because I do know for the most part sentries are considered a hard mode item or weapon. I'm not sure. Well, maybe a hard mode summon or a type of summon. And then I was kind of curious. I do know that with the Ethereum events that you can buy lower level sentries early, but I was wondering, would there be other methods to getting them? And then I'm pretty sure, and this is just me guessing, that the sentry's probably going to be really weak, because it would kind of invalidate buying sentries from the Ethereum quest. So I'm pretty sure they wouldn't make that obsolete, but just the option of having an early game sentry is pretty cool. But I mean, if it's not added, I don't think it'll hurt anything, because it seems as though we're getting summons, so we're gonna have some form of help. And maybe adding sentries too might be a little overpowered, but maybe more hard mode sentries, who knows? That's always interesting to me. Now, the reason that I brought up that entire list of things included the enchanted sword, the flying carpet, the rally, the ancient shadow armor pieces, and things like that that compete for best weapon, is that I'm wondering, will we get equivalents in the update? Because it just occurred to me that it could be argued that the enchanted sword is an equivalent to getting the meteor armor, just as much as getting possibly like the shadow orbs by themselves, or farming, I guess, enough enemies in the crimson or the corruption is the equivalent to just defeating the boss without having to crack orbs or deciding to crack orbs and going for the meteor armor. I'm just wondering, will the newer updates add more options on how it is that we can approach the game from a standard of power-ups or workarounds? And I thought that would be interesting. And again, just to reiterate, just it's optional to crack open orbs, right? Because eventually you will run out of them. So it was a great idea for the developers to allow players to summon the bosses in a different way. But it also opens up the door for you to avoid having meteors drop in your world altogether, whether it was intentional or not. And I'm just curious if the updates will allow other workarounds where we don't necessarily have to make drastic changes to our world to summon bosses and enemies. So it's just something to think about, but also to include equivalent power-ups, where I feel like the meteor armor, for the most part, already has equivalents, just in my opinion. But I'm wondering if there will be equivalents as far as, I guess, summons are concerned. I guess something comparable to the Bee Queen, or maybe something a little different. It's just something that that I was considering. So with all of that said, I guess I should keep you all up to date on what it is that I'm doing or plan on doing with this playthrough, and I guess things like that. So the first thing is, of course, I plan to try to record on a more regular schedule. Things have been really crazy, and my life's been turned upside down in a lot of ways. So once I get that under control, I'll try to go back to the normal style where I'm doing actual commentary and not post commentary. And maybe post commentary might be something special where I want to discuss something a little elaborate, like we discussed today. But for the most part, I want to go back to the old format. I do miss it, and I want to just kind of enjoy actually exploring. Because I've been trying to keep it safe and just do building, because I wasn't playing on a server for these last couple of playthroughs because of complications with the internet and power and just like my chaotic life and stuff like that. Like, I just wanted to be sure that I actually got you stuff, but I didn't do too much where you could miss out on the possibility of like maybe the character dies and then suddenly like I can't collect all the items. So I wanted to try to avoid any hiccups, but I know eventually that's going to get old, so I want to try to go back to the original style as soon as possible. But just to keep you updated, I did have a list of things that I wanted to accomplish, aside from the standard list that you'll see in the description most times. So I figured I'd share what those were, so anyone tuning in can get a general idea of what it is that I want to do in the future, and the near future, and then long term. So in the near future, I want to finish building the antlion base in the nest, because I have an idea that it might be useful once we get to hard mode. I'm not sure exactly what it's going to do, but I do want to have a chest and a save point there. So I haven't quite done that yet, but that's on the to-do list. I also want to craft a full set of iron or tungsten armor if I can. But I'm not sure because I do have some gold pieces. I can't remember exactly which pieces were gold, but just enough so I'll have protection to go down into the jungle. And then once I have that, I want to finish exploring the jungle, but it's just way too dangerous in my current state. Like, I get to one point and I always run into, like, not necessarily a brick wall, but it's a situation where I almost die almost every time, and have a feeling if I push my luck that it's eventually going to happen. So I've gotten lucky several times, and I don't want to keep pushing my luck. So I want to go ahead and complete a full set of sunken or iron armor included with, I guess, the gold pieces. If I can craft an entire gold set, that'll be great, but I doubt it. So just the best armor that I can get for now. So I finished, for the most part, working on the second base with the walkways for NPCs. That's just more about details here and there, and just beautifying it and adding stuff that I don't have yet, like bookshelves and all that. So for the most part, that's pretty much done. I just need to do touch-ups. And then, of course, lastly, finish the graveyard with the grave markers, the text, I guess the engravements, the rest in peace messages and stuff like that. So yeah, just to finish that up. I haven't had a chance to do that. And then I do have a whole new set of things that I want to do, and they're mostly building projects, but I figured I'd let you in on them since we still have time. So my long-term projects were mostly, of course, building projects. And it was funny because I wanted to make a mages guild. I've been meaning to make a mages guild in one of my worlds for a while, and I've just never gotten around to it. But I'm going to need a lot of crystal, I'm going to need a lot of marble, a lot of granite, and a lot of gold. Both like the material gold and actual gold. Because it's going to have crystal balls, summoning stations, imbuing stations. I was going to say enchanting stations, but the ones where it reduces the amount of resources you use by half, I forgot, it's some kind of alchemy station. But yes, I want to make sure that I have those as in many places as possible. I guess where it makes sense. It's going to be like an entire complete campus slash mansion and university. So the Mages Guild is going to consist of the major building, which is going to have like dozens of rooms, but then it's going to have an entire campus too. So that's going to be a pretty large project. The next one is I want to build a new hotel and resort. Since I don't use my old map anymore, I want to just go ahead and build a new hotel. And that's not really a super demanding project. It's just a place where I guess I just want to store most of the food and give guests who might join my world an option to have their own room and footlocker or place to store their items in their own bed. So, I mean, it's one of those little small things that I guess most people probably won't really care about, but it's that little touch where if somebody does, they can have their own special spawn point, and they don't always have to spawn from like the default area. They can spawn into one of the hotel rooms and have their items be right there, and it'll be their own personal room, you know. So I just figured that would be something cool to have again, because I mean, it did kind of get used, but mostly by my friends. But I plan on going a little bigger this time. But that I'm keeping secret. There's another big project that I have in the works. But yeah, I'll share that much later. The next thing I want to build is an underworld quote-unquote safe house. Now, there's really no safe places in the underworld, but for the most part, I just want to have a place where I can at least have a few seconds to fish unbothered in the lava once that's a possibility. Because I like fishing in the lava for some reason more than I do the ocean or in little lakes and stuff in the caverns. I don't know. It's just, I guess the action and having to look over your shoulder every 5 minutes might be what's exciting about it. I don't know. I just like lava fishing more than anything else. And then it's going to also kind of be a wall of flesh farming spot where I just kind of hoard a bunch of voodoo dolls of the guide. So if I want to summon the wall of flesh, I can from the end of the map. So, just stuff like that. But I guess building a safe house also includes making safe walkways in the underworld. So I guess that's considered part of the project. But I guess if I get to making the safe house first, maybe I won't necessarily need the safe walkways. But I doubt I'll be powerful enough at that time to avoid doing it. So I guess you can consider those two one and the same. I want to also build boss arenas, or maybe a boss arena, and I want to try to find a way to do it to where I can summon the Wall of Flesh, well, not the Wall of Flesh, I'm sorry, the Eye of Cthulhu, the Eater of Worlds, and the Bee Queen all in the same place. Now that's going to be a challenge. I've never tried to do that before, but I do know that summoning them requires you to be in certain biomes. So I'm thinking of making the arena in a way where I can just step into a certain zone and then just summon that specific boss and just use the same arena to fight all of them. It's something that I've never done before, and it's sort of an experiment, so there's no guarantee that it's going to work, but I would say that's a project that's on a list that may or may not turn out well. And then the last thing that I want to make, that I usually make in my worlds, is an invasion stronghold with teleporters, cannons, traps, you name it. The error that I had with the first one, I mean, it was pretty good, but I made an invasion stronghold for the Halloween event. I forgot what it's called, the Pumpkin Moon, and it was really cool because the cannons were cutting through the fodder pretty quick. But once the morning wood started coming out, who could go through walls and spew fire everywhere, the plan kind of fell apart. So I did need to have teleporters for players to get out of there and start fighting outside immediately. That kind of put them in a safe location where they were in, not necessarily the middle of the fray, but it kind of put them out so where they could start fighting, but not in a vulnerable position. So that needs to be redesigned, and I want to do that, I guess, in this map. But because there's going to be many worlds, these projects can be built in this map or maybe in a newer one. But I mean, I don't see a reason not to have multiple ones. I guess different designs, but like the same concept. But yeah, those are just things that I was considering. So those are mostly, of course, just building projects, but it's just something that I have planned for in the future as well, and I figured I'd share. I'm pretty sure that it goes without saying that I'm really looking forward to the 1.4.0 update, and I'm sure you are too. But this entire playthrough was pretty much me trying to prepare for that. That includes all the projects that I have on the side as well. Some of them not so much being affected by the 1.4.0 update, because I want to stick to some projects as far as some updates are concerned. For example, with my adventure maps, I want to stay as close as possible to 1.3. But if there's new enemies and things like that, I probably can't control something like that. But as far as the items and weapons and stuff that show up, I want to stick as closely to 1.3 as I possibly can, because that's what that adventure map is supposed to represent. But again, I'm really looking forward to it, and I know you are too, so I'm getting prepared, and I hope that you're getting prepared right alongside me. But yes, again, I'll try to post content more consistently, because if I don't, 1.4.0 will be here before I know it, and I won't be prepared, and it would defeat the entire purpose of this playthrough. So yes, I'll try to find a way. But thank you very much for joining me, and thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Later.